Nimish, for inviting me here. And hello, everyone. I'm Sherline Pimenta. I am a designer and a storyteller. I began as a designer with a formal training in design, and then now I'm more of a storyteller. I call myself actually an experience curator, uh, which means I like creating experiences, and that is what I see in storytelling. Storytelling kind of allows me to do that. So today, what I'm going to be talking about, it's an informal talk. I'm just going to tell you about my journey. Feel free to ask me questions if you have any, and I'll be happy to answer. Like everyone, I too grew up on stories. I had my fair experience of stories. My grandfather was a fantastic storyteller, and so I would wait every night to listen to that story, and he would go off to sleep, leaving me in between, like, what happened? And he would say, and then this happened, and he would drift off to sleep, and then I would have to wake him up and like, tell me the rest of the story. And so you see, I think all of us human beings come wired to pay attention to stories. And so I just loved stories. The first book that I would read when I went to school, and during the vacation, we were given books almost like 15 days to 1 month in advance for the next class. The first book I would read was the English textbook because it had so many stories. I would not touch the science books at all because they were just facts, and I would not make much sense of it. So yes, and as I grew up, I kept listening to a whole lot of stories. Atwankar sir is here. Hello, Atwankar sir. Then I went on, so I discovered that I had a talent for drawing and painting. So I went to, I studied art and at Raheja School of Art, and I loved doing illustrations. Again, it had something to do with storytelling. Came to IDC, studied visual communication there, and then I was working with Professor Trivedi, where I was again exploring visual stories. And while I was working on those visual stories and creating layouts and working on the illustration styles, I realized that there was a little gap there, in the sense there was no vocabulary to discuss visual storytelling. So we would keep going back and forth, discussing what was happening in the visual story, but using the aid of only oral storytelling terms. So I thought that was a lacuna there that needed to be looked into. So I went back to IDC and did a PhD on visual storytelling, where I looked at terms and defined a certain vocabulary that we can then use to discuss visual stories. So I looked at specifically static visual narratives, which means any visual story. It could be on any surface. It could be on a bowl. It could be a canvas. It could be a carving, a rock carving or a painting or anything. All of them come under the umbrella of visual stories, but the story has to be known. So it is not done just, as an expression. So it's different from fine art. This one, the visual storytelling, static visual narratives, has an agenda. It has to communicate stories. And while I was doing this, again, I had this hobby of reading stories. I had to read a lot of stories, look at a lot of stories. And by the time I completed my PhD, I realized that I enjoyed telling stories as well. Post the PhD, I started giving lectures and talking about static visual narratives. And just to create a little bit of interest, I would begin with a story or put in a story somewhere in between or end with a story, some story I would get in. And people started loving stories, and they said, what, you should tell stories. And I said, I would love to do that. If I can tell stories all the time, that's my dream come true. And I decided to take that really seriously. And then I had my little kids. And with kids, as a parent, you have to tell stories. You have to tell lots and lots of stories. And since I loved researching and reading stories, that's what I did all the time. And slowly and gradually, I began being invited to my children's schools, and I started telling stories there. And I realized that children, and not only children, when I spoke about static visual narratives to adults, and I would give lectures in design schools like MIT, etc., I would use stories to illustrate a point or to draw attention to the concept that I was talking about, or just to break the monotony. I would say, okay, now, enough. Let's do a story. Or even to break the ice, I would go to a place as a guest faculty and said, let me tell you a story. And immediately everybody would become my friend. Everyone wants to listen to a story. So I started using storytelling to engage with audiences, and also using storytelling as a medium to teach, using stories and the entire structure of the narrative in my teaching as well. And that's what we do today with Kathanika. I realize that teaching through stories is so much more engaging. People are interested, kids are interested. So I do a lot of workshops where I take concepts and explain the concepts to children through stories. And while I'm doing this, I'm all the time still exploring this vast sea of stories, looking at how many types of stories are there, and looking at stories from the communication lens. And I realized that stories are so much deeper. There are so many variety of stories. There are stories that are very, very short, that are used just for entertainment. Whereas there are some stories that are so much in depth, they have such a deep meaning, and that you need to listen to stories over and over again. So if you look at the first teachers, I would say, use storytelling to teach. So schooling, the way we look at schooling right now, the formal schooling that started in Greece, and they took a bunch of students and they started teaching them. But what happened prior to that? Was there no teaching before that? Of course there was. And who were these teachers then? They were the storytellers. They were the grandparents. They were the uncles and aunties who sat down around that campfire in the night while the food was being prepared, and they told stories. And what did they do when they tell stories? What are stories? Stories are nothing but experiences that happened to somebody, that it could really happen to them, or it could be just an event that they have created through imagination. And I realized that the importance of stories is so much. You need to know stories, you need to listen to stories to do a number of things. And especially for children, it is very important. One is to jog their imagination. So you need to tell them stories as opposed to visual stories. So I today ask kids and everybody to listen to stories and to consume stories in various forms. You need to look at illustrated books, you need picture stories, you need to look at visual stories, but you also need to listen to stories. And when you listen to stories, that is when your imagination and your creativity gets triggered. So for example, if I say that there was a boy, he went to the moon. When I show it in an illustrated book, as an illustrator, I am creating one way of going to the moon. There could be many ways of going to the moon. You could use a ladder, you could fly, you could do a number of things. When I spell it out through a visual, I'm showing you one way. And that can actually just, close your idea. But when you listen to a story, I leave it open to the audience to decide how they want to go to the moon. And because of listening to the stories, today we have people actually going to the moon. Maybe some storyteller somewhere just looked at the moon and said there was somebody who lived on the moon. Today we actually have people going to the moon. So stories, I think, open up this whole sea of possibilities that can happen. So that's what I believe in, the whole magic, so to say, of storytelling. Storytelling also helps you to pass on some information to the next generation. And I'm going to illustrate this with an example. So there was this time when measles was a deadly disease. It was quite deadly. A lot of the population, a lot of people were killed because of this disease. People were scared of it. They came up with some ways in which to you know to deal with this disease. And but the people at the time, they thought that, okay, we know how to take care of ourselves if we get measles. How do I give this information to, say, my grandchildren or great grandchildren? How do I pass this information? So what do is you encapsulate it in a story form, and then you make a ritual around it. So the best way to, and this is a very important thing, right? It's a life and death situation if you get measles. Now, how do I tell it? How do I pass on this information? So first of all, you glorify it. You put it on a pedestal. So you create a goddess like Sitala Devi. So you create her, you elevate this character. Then you create a ritual around it. So, and this ritual even today is practiced in a lot of places in India. So I think it is the 11th or 12th day after Holi when this ritual is practiced, where they do Sitla Mata ka puja. On this day, there is no food that is cooked in your house fresh. The fire must not be lit. You have to eat the previous day ka leftover food, mostly with curd and water and things. You have to clean your house. You have to recite, or you have to narrate a particular story that is related to Sitla Mata. Now, what has happened is today people do this ritual, but they don't tell the story. So you're doing everything, but you're not telling the story, which is the main part of this whole ritual of narrating the Sitla Mata story. So I'm going to tell you the Sitla Mata story. So the story goes like this. It so happened that Sitla Mata, who is a goddess, was up in heaven. And she decided one day that let me go down to earth and see how many people are thinking of me or praying to me. And so down came Sitla Mata, and she went to a particular village in Rajasthan. Now, while she arrived at that village, she began roaming the streets of the village. And she was sad to see that nobody was praying to her. So she walked through one street, she walked through the other street, nobody recognized her. Oh, and she changed herself. She took the form of an old lady. So people wouldn't, she didn't come with all her crown and everything. She came just like an old lady. She was walking the streets. Now people were wondering, who is this stranger? In those times, everybody knew everybody else in the village. She kept walking, and while she was passing one particularly narrow street, the lady of the house happened to be, it was lunchtime, and she had cooked some rice. And she was straining the rice, and after straining the rice, she threw off the rice water. Now she threw the rice water over the wall, and the hot rice water came and fell on this lady, this old lady. And she had blisters all around her, and she was burned. And she started feeling uncomfortable. And so she started running through the streets of that village, screaming in agony. People noticed her, but nobody came ahead to help her because they did not recognize her. They thought, who is this strange woman? Now there happened to be a potter's house there, a kumbhar. And the lady of the house, the potter, the kumbhar's wife was there, and she took pity on this old lady. And she called her home. She said, please, please come here. You look like you are in pain. Let me help you. So she went and she took some cool water from her well and poured it over this old lady. She said, you're badly burned. You've got blisters. You come in. She put cool water over the lady, and the old lady started feeling better. So she said, come into my house and have a seat. So she took her to the courtyard. She made her sit there. And she said, I'm sure you must be hungry now after this whole ordeal. Unfortunately, I have nothing much to offer you. I have some leftover food from yesterday's with a little bit of curd, some rice, watery rice and curd. I can give you that. She gave that to this old lady who ate it up. She was quite hungry. And after that, the potter's wife said that, Mother, you look, your hair is all disheveled. Let me comb it for you. And so she took a comb and she began combing this old lady's hair. And then she reached the back of the old lady's head. To her astonishment, when she parted the hair, she saw that there was an eye there. There was an eye that was looking at her. At that moment, the potter's wife was surprised. She threw off the comb and she sprang up from there, and she was trying to run away. She said, "Who is this? Is this a human being, or is this some ghost or some unnatural being?" And that is when the old lady said to the potter's wife that don't get scared, don't worry. I am not an evil spirit. I'm actually a goddess. And my name is Sitla Mata. And that is when she changed herself. She stood there before this potter's wife in all her glory, with her crown and her jewelry, all sparkling and everything. And she said, so the potter's wife now realized that this is a goddess. So she immediately fell at her feet and she sought blessings from her. And she told her that you've come to my house. I am thankful and grateful that you came here. Unfortunately, I am so poor, I don't have any place for you to sit. Where should I offer you to sit? And the goddess said, it's all right, don't worry too much about it. You have a donkey. There was a donkey standing out. Every potter at that time had a donkey to help carry their ware around. So she said, don't worry, I'll sit on this donkey. And so she went and she sat down on the donkey. And she said to the lady that, what do you wish? Tell me. Anything you wish, I will grant you. So she said, look, I'm very poor. I don't have anything much. But now that you've come, I want you to stay here in our village, and I want you to bless all of us just like you're blessing me. I want you to bless the whole village. So the goddess, she said, I will drive out the poverty from your house. And she took a broom and she cleaned up the courtyard. And so if you look at the iconography of Sitla Mata, she's seated on a donkey. She holds a broom in her hand and she is granting blessings, of course. And she told this lady that, I'm going to, if you wish me to stay here, I will stay here, but you need to build a shrine for me. So the poor lady said that, how can I build a shrine? I don't have money to build my house properly. How will I build a shrine for you? So the goddess says, go and ask the king for money, and he will ask him to build a shrine. So the potter's wife said, how can I go to the king and ask him? I mean, will he believe me? I am a poor potter's wife. So the goddess Sitla Mata said, of course he'll believe you. You go to the king and tell him, 7 days from today, there's going to be a fire. And only your house will be spared, because I'm going to be watching over your house. The rest of the village, the rest of the houses is going to burn. So that will be a sign, and then he will believe you and he will build a temple for you. And so saying, the goddess disappeared. The potter's wife did as she was told. She went to the king. The king, of course, didn't believe her. Yeah, fine. Let's see. There's going to be a fire. I don't believe you. She came back, and sure enough, in 7 days' time, there was a fire indeed. And the potter's house was the only house that did not catch fire. All the other houses were burned to ashes. And that is when the king came and he said that, I'm sorry, I did not believe you, but I now believe you. And so he built a temple called Sitla Mata Temple, which is still today there in that village in Rajasthan. And Sitla Mata said to this lady, and tell the king that you have to set aside a day for me, the 11th day or the 12th day after Holi, when you have to do this ritual. You will not cook any food in the house. You will eat the previous day's food. You will put neem leaves and decorate your house. You will keep your premises clean, and you will narrate the story every year. So to this day, all the rituals are taken care of. I mean, are done. I have people in my society who do these rituals, and they do it very, very religiously. But when I ask them, why are you doing this ritual? They have no clue. Today, fortunately, measles is not a big thing. We've got the vaccines. So, there is no, I wouldn't say there is no use of it, but what was in this story is everything you require to know this disease. How do you recognize it? You recognize it with those boils that appear on the body. And how do you describe those boils? Well, they look whitish, like pearls. So that is very, very close to like when rice water is falling on your skin. Then what do you do about it? You have to clean your house. You have to keep your premises clean. That is why the broom is used, and the goddess says that you have to keep your house clean. You have to decorate it with neem leaves because it has antibacterial properties. What else do? You do not cook food in the house because at that time houses were small. Cooking was done within the house, and the heat from the cooking would irritate the person who has got measles. So in order to give comfort to the person who is suffering from measles, it was prescribed that you do not cook at all. So food is bought from the neighbors' houses or from the other relatives, and so you do all of this for a few days. So this very important information was encapsulated in this story, and to make sure that it goes down the generations, a ritual was made out of it. So you tell it, you do it every year. It's like your practice drill, your fire drill. What do you do in case of the fire? You do X, Y, Z. You practice it every year, and you know what to do. So I started looking into such stories, and what I realized was that these stories are so important. We need to tell stories. Well, sometimes to keep such information alive, because maybe if some disease comes, and I'm sure there must be some stories that were told when the pandemic like this one hit. Unfortunately, it was not told very often, and it did not reach us because this is not the first time a pandemic like this has happened. It has happened before in history, but maybe the stories are lost. So that's what I see, the power of stories. And today I'm telling the stories. I'm looking at folk tales, and folk tales are very, very different from fairy tales. Not all folk tales are end up in a happy ending. Folk tales are quite brutal, but that is how life is. So exposing oneself, exposing kids to folk tales in order to tell them the real life around us is one of the things that I'm doing. So yes, that is how, and the way I look at it. So oral storytelling also has a lot of crafting that goes into it. So how do you tell the story? How do you begin the story? The various parts of the story. How do you get the audiences involved or engrossed in your story? How do you create that whole kind of experience? So when I tell a story, well, this story I narrated just in short, but when I tell the story to the children, I take time to describe the character, to describe the area where it is happening. If it's happening in a farm, so how is the farm like? If there is a character there, what does the character look like? So get the, transform the audiences and take them to this imaginary world where the story is unfolding. I used to do in-person sessions. So when I do in-person sessions, I try to create that atmosphere using music, using food, using the sense of smell. So we have a lot of fragrant candles and other things that one can use to build the atmosphere. So I do all those. So that is what I had to share about storytelling and design. Okay. So these days I do workshops where I take the topic. Like I did one of the things I did was about bees, where I gave information about the whole world of bees, of how do the bees live, what do they eat, what are the things they produce in, and what are the various stages that the bees go through. And I did these workshops where I told, these workshops happened at the Bee Institute, so where the participants could actually see the different kinds of bees. So there are 4 kinds of honey bees from whom humans can consume the honey. So I could actually show them the bees, show them the different types of bees. We had a honey tasting session. So I create these sessions that are unforgettable. Try to create. So people should remember it and recall that, okay, this was what was done. And the secondary agenda is to create interest in the kids for these topics, which they can go later and study in detail if they wish to. Because we certainly need a lot more researchers. There are so many things in nature that we need to find answers to. So I'm hoping that children get interested in these areas and take it up as a profession, or even if not as a full-time profession, as a part-time hobby. They do a little bit of research, they go and look at it in depth.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that is what I had to share. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, that was very different, very interesting, Sherline. Guys, folks, questions. Yeah, I have many, but I will wait for others to open the session. Pradyut?
I had just one comment, just observation. I truly believe what you were saying. I think story does very unique way of creating experiences and meaning. I quoted, you all know Harari, the author of *Sapiens*. I think he said, when he's describing what got us as a species, right? Not just from other animals, but even from other human species, was the ability to really create stories which are completely out of imagination. And then stories were the differentiator how Homo sapiens got a bigger and bigger society, because you believe in story. Even if there is a conflict in one story versus another story, you still cooperate because it is a product of imagination. Just wanted to have that comment out there.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Professor,
yes, sir has Yes, sir.
So you're on mute.
We can't hear you. You have to unmute.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. I just have one or two questions which I think I've always sort of wondered about. You're telling stories to children, and children really enjoy it. They get gripped and they're quite emotionally involved in the process. What is the experience? Would the stories be different when you're told to a larger, to a bigger age group? Maybe 20 years, 30 years, and all that. What will be the difference between these kind of stories? I know you're working mainly with children, but since you studied storytelling in detail, you might be able to tell. That's the first question. Second question is, and the structure of the story and the content becomes so strong that the messages are hidden and sometimes they're lost. It's exactly like advertising. In the advertising, there's so much interesting things happen, you forget what they're selling.
Right. So
how do you take care of these two issues?
Okay. So to answer the first question, so there are, if I have to tell a story to a group of children and to a group of adults, let's say 15, 16 and above, one is the way of telling the story would change. The language that I use would change. Secondly, the theme itself of the story. There are some stories that I cannot tell children because they will not understand it. The content would be more suitable for adult audiences. Like the Arabian Nights. The Arabian Nights were written for adult audiences. But I do tell children those stories, but I kind of cover up and take it in a different direction altogether. If you read the Arabian Nights, it was told, these were stories that were told along the Silk Route to entertain each other, to entertain the merchants. They were mainly stories about wives not being, having affairs and all of those kind of stories. And they came naturally because when the merchants were traveling, that was the biggest fear they had. That I'm here on the travel, on my trade, what is my wife doing back home? And everyone had this fear, it looks like, that everybody's wife is not faithful to them and they are having affairs with some servants or somebody or the other. And most of Arabian Nights is full of these. So the difference is when I tell it to children, I will not put this unfaithful wala thing. If like the very first story in Arabian Nights begins with the wife of this Sultan going, being unfaithful to the Sultan and sleeping with the slaves. Now, for the children, I say they were having a party and she went and had a party with her friends. I wouldn't even name male friends over there. So that's the way I would. The other thing is, depending on the age group, some of the folk tales have a lot of brutality and bloodshed in it. Some of the folk tales have suicide in it. Now, I wouldn't want to use these terms for children. So I take the liberty to change the story a little bit and make it child friendly up to a certain age group. Like for 15, 16-year-olds and above, I would tell the story as it was. I mean, I'm sure they'll be able to deal with the word suicide and they would understand it. But for smaller children, I do not use such words. So that was the answer to the first question. I'm sorry, I forgot the second question.
No, second question is that many times the message is lost because the story itself is so gripping.
Yes. So, in my opinion, I do not like telling the story and giving the message. The whole idea of a story is discovery, for people to discover. And there, from what I have seen in studies, in stories, is there are many layers that one could learn from. A story is like an onion. You tell the story and you can take so many things. And the more you listen to the story, every time you listen to the same story, you'll take away another message. So, in fact, when I run this WhatsApp group, broadcast group called Bedtime Stories, where I send stories to kids, and I explicitly send them with a message to parents that do not ask your children what is the moral of the story. Do not ask them what they learn from the story. Because when you do that, the child forgets or does not enjoy listening to the story, but is listening to the story to answer that question. So the child throughout, he loses enjoyment of the story. He's like, okay, abhi story ke baad mummy puchegi what is the moral of the story. I have to have some answer. So every sentence that is said, the child keeps thinking, okay, this must be what we learned or this must be what we learned. So I don't want to do that because I tell the parents that let them enjoy it. Sometimes you understand the moral of the story 1 week from when you heard the story, sometimes it is 2 months from when you heard the story, sometimes it is 10 years from when you heard the story. Like some of the stories I recall now, which my grandfather had told me then, and I'm like, oh, so that is what it was. Some stories I understood when I went to college and I was learning psychology. And in that class, I would sit and listen to the teacher and I'm like, oh, okay, so this was what was happening there in that story. So I want that story, I want that discovery to be naturally. We are not going anywhere. You don't have to learn everything in a single time. So I ask parents to let the children listen to the same story over and over again. Then again, it differs. There are some children who want a new story every day, and there are some children who want the same story every day.
Okay, that's quite interesting.
So I'm like, just go with the flow. Just enjoy the story. Don't tax yourself about what am I learning from this and what is happening in the story. Some stories, just nothing happens. I think somebody wrote it just because some child was telling, "Kya abhi story sunao." Like every time you can't fill it in with fundas. Sometimes it's just essay. Sometimes you don't have the answer. Ki kyun aise kiya? I don't know. Sometimes it is, but this could be done in this way. I'm like, yes, it could be done. Why they didn't do it, I don't know. This is how it's done in the folktale. But you can tell it. Sometimes I have children disagreeing with it, which is also very interesting. Like the story of Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel, the story starts with the man and his wife having 2 children, and there was no food to eat. So they could not see their children die. So the wife says to the husband that, why don't you take the children and leave the children in the forest? I can't see my children dying of hunger. And so the father went, and my child asked me, but they could have grown their food, no? I said, yes, you could grow your food, but your climatic conditions should be fine. Hansel and Gretel happened in European countries, where there is solid ice for a couple of months, where nothing can grow. So that is where, so then we went to this discussion of, oh, so this happens. So stories lead to so many interesting discussions. Sometimes stories are just क्या कहते हैं, in Marathi they have the word nimitta, just a reason to discuss something else.
Mhm. I think we got another question,
Yeah.
and that is from Muralidhar Reddy. Have you tried to explore proverbs in your storytelling?
Hi, Sherline.
Hi Murli.
Okay. So first of all, you have not showed any visuals. So you told that you have to listen to stories and you told the story. So that's the thing. And why I wanted to understand this is because we have a very, very rich proverbs which have so much messages in them. Have you
Yes.
tried to specifically address those things in your storytelling sessions?
Well, I have not done any story telling session particularly on proverbs. I'm still studying them. The problems with proverbs in the Indian context is most of them are in the native language. I have to understand it, and because we are talking to children who come from different backgrounds. So, for example, just today I was reading a story about a Brahmin girl who married a tiger. And the whole story comes from a proverb in Tamil. Now, I got the English translation, but in English, it will not have the same, you won't enjoy it so much. In English, it sounds very weird. It just doesn't make sense. So I'm trying to, figure out a way how I can make it interesting. So the story by itself is very interesting, but it doesn't connect to the proverb because it loses the meaning in the English translation. In Tamil, it will definitely mean something quite nice. So that's the problem with proverbs everywhere. So there are paintings in the Netherlands and all where the artists have painted the proverbs. What are in English, we can understand. But again, it all comes to language. That's the issue with proverbs.
Yeah, you can't even translate a lot of them into English. Cool.
So as a story, that story was very nice. But if I try to put it to that proverb, it will make sense. People who are speaking Tamil, maybe it will work for them.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Sherline.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious on stories which are to be told now, right? There are hundreds of stories in different cultures, and that's fine. We have new situations, right? How do we get the new stories? Okay. There are new things. I know that you've tried a couple of them. There are new situations, and we need new stories. We need new storytelling using the storytelling power of it, right? Like say, the way it's raining in Bangalore, or the way the kind of density is increasing all around us, so that I can't do anything, or something like that. So what is happening is we've always picked stories, and we've tried from the moral angle, from the folk angle, and stuff like that. And I'm just trying to see what are the things one need to do to tell a modern story, a story for now. Trying to look into the power of storytelling, right? And that's what I've been dabbling around from the last couple of years through other forms. But I would like to listen from you. What has been your experience? If you want to tell a story on like something very contemporary, what is happening right now? How would you go about doing that?
Sure. So from what I have been reading about stories, maybe the times have changed, but the lessons are essentially the same, is what I have come to realize. We just need to lift that. Like, for example, there is a story that I put up recently on Kathanika YouTube, which was about this farmer and his wife, where the farmer thinks that the wife does nothing at home. So he tells the wife that, I work so hard on my farm. What do? You do nothing. You're just sitting the whole day and just pottering around, moving some vessels here and there. That's all you do. So she says, okay, why don't you, stay home for a day and I'll go to the farm. And so he says, yeah, why not? I mean, I can look after my daughter and I can do whatever it'll be so nice to make some soup and do this. And she said, fine, you do that. And she goes off the next day and he stays at home. And he realizes that he can't, he tries to do things. Like he begins by trying to roast the sausages and he takes it out and he keeps. And then he thinks, oh, it would be nice if I have a glass of cider, which was stored in the basement. So he goes down, he leaves the sausages, he goes down to the basement to take the cider. And the dog comes and takes the sausages. So he hears that the dog is taking away the sausages. So he sees that his glass is not full. So he says, okay, I'll keep the tap open. And by the time I chase the dog, I'll come back and I'll close the tap. He goes to chase the dog takes the sausages and runs away. And so he doesn't get the sausages, they are gone. When he comes down, the cider has overflowed and everything is gone. So on and so forth. He does a lot of things and everything like just goes, he's not able to manage anything. At the end of the day, when he somehow gets entangled in some rope and everything, his wife comes and all the time he is giving her fundas that you should do this like this, you should do this like this. How much time does it take? But when she comes home, she realizes the house is a complete mess. The sausages, the dog is stuffed up, the farm, whatever vegetable farm she had, that is ruined, this, that, no. Moral of the story, he says that, look, you look after your house and I will do my work. Now, when I told this in today's day, this was the message that women, though we think their work is not so great, they actually handle a lot of things. Now, this story was nice for that time, where it was mainly patriarchal, where people believed in that you do this and I'll do that. But today we have men and women doing different kind of work. And what I would take from this story is that the grass is always greener on the other side. So I am making a part 2 to this story, where I say that the woman, like they are talking, the story continues. So I'm making a part 2 where the story continues. The next day he comes and he tells his wife, okay, I'm going to the field. By the way, how was your day at the farm? And then she begins saying that, my day wasn't too great. First of all, I did this, like I did not water this because it looked fine. And he says, what? You didn't water the saplings. The saplings need to be watered. At that stage, they need to be given water every 6 hours and you have not done that. And then she goes on to tell that she didn't have a great day at the farm either. She thought that at the farm was a cup of tea. He does nothing. So basically, to bring it to today's term, I would say that both people are doing equal work and you should, everybody is working equally hard. So it is the same. And of course, in today's day, we don't have farms. We can take this story and put it in a software company. Ki tum kya karte ho? I'm sitting at home and looking at. But the problem is the same, that each one undermining the other person's work. So that is what I see. So what I do is through my tales, I twist it a little to make it more relevant to contemporary times in this way.
Thanks.
So Sherline, I must mention that, Kiran was on this platform a few weeks ago, and he was mentioning, it'd be nice to have some stories to illustrate, to make games on. So maybe, you guys should talk.
Yeah, sure.
We've been talking, yeah.
Oh, you've been talking. Okay, great. Nice. So there is a question from Apurv Anurag. He says, can you suggest few things or tips for a beginner storyteller to be good at it?
Okay. Apurv, where are you? Can you tell me what exactly you mean tips as in for oral storytelling? How do you become good at it? Well, you learn through practice. So the more you tell, everybody, all of us are storytellers. So everyone comes. The only thing is that you need to practice. You need to begin telling. There are many books available. Like everything, you can. There are a lot of storytellers out there. So listen to all those storytellers and figure out what is their technique and see what what appeals to you. It's like, how do you learn art? You are an illustrator, you want to draw. There are a whole lot of artists out there. what style appeals to you? Do you want to do folk art, or do you want to do like the Renaissance, or do you want to do modern art? You go and look out there, and you just begin telling stories, and you experiment and you improve on the go.
So Sherline, I have a question.
Mhm.
And what I want to ask was, what kind of assignments do you take? And is this whole thing about storytelling, is it economically viable for you?
Okay. So yes, to tell you the truth, storytelling is just picking up in India.
Mhm.
To sustain from telling stories alone is not feasible at the moment.
Mhm.
But you can do corporate events. Those come in sometimes. I do workshops I do a lot of design workshops as well. So I use both of it. But for a storyteller, just a storyteller to survive, it is quite difficult. I mean, I don't know of any storyteller who is sustaining only by doing pure storytelling alone. Unless maybe you have your own show or something, which I have not seen. And this storytelling, there is a whole group of storytellers, or oral storytelling is just coming back. I see this growing from the last 5-6 years.
Mhm.
So I attended, we have a storytelling network in India. There is a storytelling headquarters in Chennai, where they have a storytelling conference every year. So the tribe was small, but slowly and steadily it is growing. Like when I was growing up, I did not hear of any storytelling sessions anywhere that I could go and attend. But then times have also changed. Today we have more of nuclear families. We have more of other media. You have YouTube, you have whatnot. So you have films, and you have animation films, and you have a lot of visual storytelling happening. But oral storytelling has a charm of its own. Like I said, firstly, it improves your listening skills. It sharpens your listening skills, because you have to have patience to sit and listen, which is why I prescribe oral storytelling to all parents for their children. Just the thing of sitting through, because you don't have anything to look at. You have to just wait, and it completely depends on the pace of the storyteller. So if the storyteller is slow, like once upon a time, you want to speed it. Jaldi karo, jaldi karo. In YouTube, though, you have the facility to go and speed up the narration. But when you go actually and use it, it is quite a slow process. But yes, coming back to your question, no, it is not possible right now to do storytelling alone and sustain.
Okay. And the first part of the question was, what kind of assignments do you take?
So I work on projects where one is the corporate engagements, where I do storytelling, or tell them how to use storytelling in your projects, how to use the storytelling element. I work with schools. I work with museums and other organizations, where they have a particular topic, and they say, that a lot more people are opening up to this field of storytelling. And I work with them. So then I have to research the story. They tell me the topic, what topic and what message they need to give, and I work with researching the story, crafting the story, figuring out what is the best means to deliver the story. Should it be an oral story? Should it be a story that has a puppet element to it? And accordingly, the costing differs.
Sure.
So that is the kind of work. So I worked with the airport, Mumbai International Airport, where they had a festival. They have a festival every year, and they have a theme. So they were doing states. So we've done Maharashtra, I've done Kerala, I've done Northeast. And the whole idea is to tell about those states, the culture, the people, to audiences. So I would research stories that and bring tie these elements in. So I would try to tell a story that has something woven into the story. So maybe food. So if I'm talking about food, that session is only food. I will tell the story, and while doing the story, I will describe the food. So then people get curious that, oh, is it, what is this? And then at the end of the story, I would preferably have a food tasting session where they can actually go and taste, because through the story, you're like getting the audiences so excited about that particular element. They want to see what it is. So I did this session for Bhaudaji Lad Museum, where he looked at a variety of mangoes. So I told them stories about mangoes. There is a goddess to whom mangoes is offered in Tamil Nadu. I told her story, and we actually did a mango tasting session. So all of us are faithful to our one or two particular type of mangoes, and we have got like around 1,200 variety of mangoes in India, out of which around 450 varieties is available in the market. And mangoes start from December and it goes right up to September. Different variety of mangoes coming in different months. But most of us stick to the mangoes only in the peak summer season, and we go only with our Alfonso or certain kind. So the whole idea of this workshop was to open up this. So we got the mangoes, we put them next to each other, we tasted all the mangoes. So that's what the whole idea of how I work is an experiential thing. So I have a story element, I have an information element, I have a activity, a hands-on activity element, and then and a discussion. So it's not just left there. So although I advertise for children, but the parents get involved as well. Right now, it's difficult to advertise, as in to get the parents, the adults actually. Adults are like, kya sunenge, story hai, kya hoga. But if you get the kids, the adults come in accompanying the kids, and once they are there, they want to get into the workshop. And then they realize that, oh, this is quite different. This is something fun.
Okay.
Yes, fun is a big part of what I do.
Okay, thank you for that. There is a question that we have from Ashish Handa.
Yes.
Do you want to read that?
Just a second. Have you looked at storytelling by so-called religious, spiritual gurus, leaders in remote places, semi-urban cities, etc., or even large kathas that are run in pandals, which have power to almost create movements? What is your take on that? No, so far I have steered away from all those gurus and all. Although I admire their oratory skill. I mean, some of them I know have the ability to hypnotize or change or brainwash people. I don't know how they do it, but that tells you the power of stories. But no, I haven't done any study.
So Sherline, keeping the manipulative side of mass storytelling aside, I have seen, even in my family, right, people from really good scientific background, as they age, move towards very spiritual, very deep philosophical side of life, and all with good changes. Like, let's say, even if you read Bhagavad Katha or you get into Gita, it's all stories, right? There are just so many things. And the connect from your, maybe if you call it mythology or your old culture, to today's life, today's everyday life. And because you are adults, right, you relate to it, you imagine, and you even work on it day to day, and you learn day to day, and that keeps them engrossed. And then you, at that age, like my parents' age, you're also in that authoritative power of imparting this learning or knowledge that you gain to a younger generation as well. So they're like at the right place where they assimilate the stories coming to them in all different ways, right? And then you move to an age group which is more than that, where you're Astha channels or Sanskar channels, and when you have also seen life quite a bit, you also want to learn more from them. So I was just thinking, the way storytelling, I also have a kid, so the way I relate stories to him, the way I grasp stories at my peer level and then from elders. So how there may be like a nice link of how stories age with you. Yeah.
Yes.
So I was actually, and because so my mother is a doctor, and then she moved to a completely spiritual side, and I've seen her go from a very practical woman to a very spiritual lady. So I still don't get it. So I'm still trying to learn from that. But yeah, there's something I wanted to share.
So that is, I think, the magic of, one is of how you're going through life. Stories have a lot of philosophical thing in it. Even if it's a simple story, there's a lot of philosophy in it, and they are so powerful. Small stories have a lot of power. Like, let me at this point tell you this story. So there was once a man, and he went to the forest, and in the forest he was chopping wood. He was a woodcutter. He was chopping wood, and he happened to see a fox. Now this fox was injured, so he could not go and get his own food. So he was lying there, and this man said, now what will happen to this fox? Would be interesting to see. He's probably going to die. He can't get up. He can't go and hunt. So let me see what happens. And to his astonishment, he saw a tiger who had caught a prey, a deer probably, and had got it a little distance from the fox. And the tiger sat down there and had his meal, and he went off, leaving the rest of the deer there. And this fox, he dragged himself to that deer and he consumed whatever was left. So this man said, oh, okay, so God provides for everyone. And he came the next day. Again, he was in the same spot. And the same thing happened again. The tiger came with something else, a wild boar perhaps, ate whatever he needed and left. And the fox dragged himself and ate. So this man was watching this and he said, so God does indeed look after us. So he said, wow, I should learn from this. Why am I sitting and working so hard? I'll also sit. God looks after everyone. God will look after me. So he sits down there. मैं आज से काम नहीं करूँगा. I'm just going to sit here. And if God loves me or whatever, he'll provide me food. So he sits there. Now he's waiting. One day goes, second day goes. Nobody comes with any food for him. Third day goes, fourth day goes. He's sitting there. Then one hermit passes by and he sees this man who is now reduced to his bones, who's waiting there as a half dead and all. And the hermit says, like, what happened to you? Are you ill or something? So he said, no, I was completely fine. He said, then what happened? So he said, no, I saw that fox. He had some problem, but the tiger was coming and the tiger gave him food. So he ate it. So I thought God is providing for everyone. So I am sitting here waiting for God to provide for me. So, you should learn from an example. So the hermit said, my man, you are looking at the wrong example. You were all able. There's nothing wrong with you. Why did you look at the fox and use that as an example? You look at the tiger, no? The tiger came and kept the food there because this chap couldn't get up. You were fine. So your whole thing is you are looking at the wrong example, and that is how most of us probably live our life. We are looking at the wrong example. We just need to move our focus and look around. So you every time you listen to the story, you'll take away something new. And my one request to everybody is that start telling stories. Listen to stories. They really, really open your worldview. Listen to stories from all around the world, because today we have that opportunity. Because of technology, stories are on the net everywhere. So unlike previous days where we were living in a shell because we did not have access to worldview, today we have access to worldview, and take in the good, leave the bad. Everything has a good and a bad side. So recognize what you're taking in, take the good, leave the bad, and not only take that good, spread that good news to others as well.
So thank you for that, Sherline. I think we have just one last question. We have a minute for that.
Okay.
And the question is, can you share any insights from your doctoral study in storytelling? So we'll make this the last question, and you have about a minute and a half to answer this.
Okay. From my doctoral studies, where I think I'll need another session on that. It's going to be quite, I can't share it in a minute. So it took me 6 years to discover. I don't think I can put it in 1 minute. But before we leave, I have one final story for you to end the day. So if everybody is done with the question, I would like to share a story.
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead with that.
Yeah, and then we'll wind up for the evening. So again, just what I want to say is that tell stories, listen to stories. So I'm putting up stories on this YouTube channel, and I want parents to, you don't have to even get your kids to listen to those stories. You listen to those stories and you tell those stories, and it will make a difference. The very same story. Each of us sitting here, 26 of us here, if we have to narrate the same story, each of us will narrate it in a very different way. And each of us will add to it a different charm. And each of us, when we take away from that very same story, will take away something very different. So on that note, I want to share this beautiful stories of a story about why we should tell stories. So the story is called The Umbrella and the Pair of Shoes. Okay. So once upon a time, there lived a girl called Meenakshi. Meenakshi was a pretty little girl, very bubbly, very active. She would run everywhere. She lived in a small village in Tamil Nadu. She had at home her grandfather, her grandmother, her parents. Meenakshi was the apple of everybody's eye. And Meenakshi's grandmother and grandfather told her lots of stories. And Meenakshi was a small parrot. She used to listen to those stories and go around telling those stories to everybody, her friends, everyone. Meenakshi's mother sang beautiful songs, and Meenakshi again would mimic it and sing those songs. Meenakshi started going to school, she started growing up, and she would take those stories and take those songs and sing it for her friends in school. Meenakshi started growing, she went to middle school. Well, now she began telling those stories a little less often because she was growing up. She began singing those songs also less often. Soon Meenakshi grew up. It was time for Meenakshi's marriage. Well, at this time, Meenakshi used to sing once in a while, used to tell a story once in a while. Meenakshi got married to a very nice man, and she went to his house and they started living happily in this house. Now Meenakshi got engaged with her day-to-day work. She got busy. She had to look after the house. She had to clean the house. She had to look after 10 other things, look after the in-laws and all of that. Now Meenakshi didn't have any time at all. She stopped singing the song and she stopped telling the story. Now it so happened that every afternoon Meenakshi used to take a nap. She used to get so tired. She used to wake up early in the morning at 4 o'clock, clean the surroundings, do the rangoli and prepare the food and all of that. By afternoon, Meenakshi was terribly tired. So she used to take a small nap. So one afternoon, Meenakshi was taking a nap. She lay down on her mat. She put her hand under her head and she went off to sleep. And like all of us, Meenakshi fell into a deep sleep after being so tired. And in her deep sleep, her mouth opened. Like all of us. Now, the story and the song that were sitting inside Meenakshi were very suffocated. They wanted to go out. But Meenakshi had stopped telling the story and had stopped singing the song. So the story said to the song, come on, now is our chance. Meenakshi is asleep. Let's escape. So the story said, yeah. Finally, come on, let's go. So the story jumped out of her mouth and became an umbrella. And it went and hung outside the door. And the song jumped out and became a pair of slippers and went and sat outside the door. In the evening, Meenakshi's husband came home. He came home and he saw a black umbrella and he saw a pair of slippers. He came inside and he said, Meenakshi, who has come home? She said, nobody has come home. He said, no, certainly somebody has come. I've seen the umbrella outside and the slippers outside. She said, what umbrella? What slippers? You go and see. So Meenakshi came out. She looked at the umbrella. She looked at the slippers. I don't know. So she went back in. And that day or that evening, Meenakshi and her husband had a big fight. Somebody has definitely come. Who is it? I want to know. And she's saying, Baba, nobody came. Trust me. No, somebody has come. And the fight went on deep into the night. Finally, Meenakshi's husband said, I'm going away. I'm very angry. I'm going away. So he took his blanket and he walked out of the house. It was late night. He said, where do I go to sleep? So he thought of the Hanuman temple. He said, I'll go and sleep there. So he took his blanket and everything and went and slept outside the Hanuman temple. Now it so happened, I don't know if any of you know, but in those days there were lamps that were lit. And I don't know if any of you know this, but in villages, when it becomes dark and the lamps are lit and people go to sleep and the lamps are dimmed or put off, all the flames, they get together in the temple and they have a discussion. You wouldn't know this, right? All the flames do this. Every night, even when we switch off our tube light, I'm very sure the light goes and has some discussion in some temples. So the flames used to go and have a discussion. Now all the flames of that village had collected in that Hanuman temple. And all of a sudden, one chotu flame came running and joined. So the other flame said, where were you? It's so late. We have been waiting and waiting to start the discussion. Where were you? That flame was from Meenakshi's house. And that flame said, Arey, what to tell you? Today they were not going to sleep only. Why? What happened? Oh, you see, the story and the song that was in Meenakshi's stomach were getting suffocated and they wanted to escape. So they escaped. And the story became the umbrella and the song became the slippers. And it went and it stood outside. Meenakshi's husband came and he wouldn't believe her that nobody has come at home. And she tried to tell him, and that husband and wife, oh my God, the way they fought, and they were not going to sleep at all. So I couldn't come for the meeting. Now, Meenakshi's husband, who was lying outside, heard all of this and he smiled. And then he went off to sleep happily. The next day, he woke up, he went home, and he went and he held Meenakshi like that. Nicely took her in his arm. And he said, Meenakshi, sing that song for me that you used to sing. And tell me that story that you used to tell everyone. I've heard that you told us. Meenakshi said, what song? What story? Go, I don't have time for all of this. Because now the song had gone. And so had the story. And so, if you don't tell stories and you don't sing those songs and you look around your house, I'm sure you'll find a new umbrella somewhere or an extra slipper somewhere. And you wouldn't know where it came from. Or I don't know, we are designers. You will find a new file in your laptop somewhere. And you will wonder where it came from. So better tell those stories and better sing those songs.
Definitely, we are going to remember that. Thank you, Sherline. Thank you so much for that wonderful story. And I'm sure we'll call you again for more stories. And maybe we'll also, tell you a few stories.
Sure.
Thank you so much.